The world is so much larger than I thought. I thought we were sent along paths, but it seems there are no paths. The going itself is the path.
This is Pints with Jack, Season 8, Episode 7, Perelandra, Chapter 5, An Interview with a Lady, Part 2. If you listened to last week's, you will recognize we had to chop it up. There was so much good stuff in it. So, without further ado, welcome back to Pints with Jack, friends, your favorite C.S. Lewis podcast, run by three Tholkandrians, Matt, David, and Andrew. In this season, we're once again following the adventures of Elwyn Ransom, who this time is exploring Perelandra. And today, we're looking at the back half of Chapter 5, where Ransom finally gets to meet and talk to the mysterious Green Lady. Actually, in this case, he already has, but we're going to continue this conversation much more deeply. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. And again, I'm just going to do a little shout out. If you want to give us a little rating, we'd love that. Just press that little 5-star and help us out. Show us a little love.
And I don't know if you guys have refreshed your drinks during our break, but I've now got a Stella Artois since it's now a little later in the morning.
Oh, wow.
What are you guys doing?
Wow, 9:37. David's day drinking.
Now people know. Okay.
I'm sorry. We can scratch that.
It could be PM.
Hey, Lewis and Tolkien met around that time in the morning for a quick drink.
There you go.
Lewis says that one of the brightest spots of his week is when Tolkien would come by at about 11 o'clock and they'd have a dram of something and talk would usually fly no higher than bawdy and puns. So I am drinking cold coffee, still left over from our last episode. Not a week ago, but an hour ago, but time moves funnily sometimes in podcast worlds.
I love that.
Well, we are now on to the section that I've entitled Evening and Morning, the Third Day. And it's another day and another peculiar wake-up. So Ransom is feeling insecure, although not because a dragon is laying at his feet and a yellow wallaby is by his head. Lewis is clearly having some fun with the animals on Perelandra. But the animals keep nudging him until he gets up, and then they shepherd him through the wood and basically to the Green Lady, who is standing motionless, but in the text describes her as not disengaged. What do you guys think here? Is she praying? Is she communing with Maleldil?
I'm going to let Andrew take that one, but beforehand, I'm just going to make a comment related to this of, it just continues this thing where, like, do you just wish you were part of this world? Remember last episode where he couldn't tell if it was Maleldil or her speaking or there was something else. So there's just a deep intimacy. We see the innocence. Now we see here almost the divine will pushing through the creatures to enter in and guiding. It's like there's a deep communion that's leading to just a deep intimacy, and you can sense that with Maleldil in something obviously we all long for. And so again, Lewis is just doing this so beautifully.
I love this too. She's beautiful, naked, shameless, young, obviously a goddess. The face so calm and with a concentration of its mildness, a face that was like the sudden coldness and stillness of a church when we enter it from a hot street, that made her a Madonna. So I'm not sure if she's praying or communing or whatever, but remember that labor is a result, a penalty for the fall. And she doesn't have to do anything. And so she's not. She's just existing. And even that existing is beatific.
I would also note that in that passage that you just read, he then compares her to a couple of figures from Greek mythology. Yes. And I think the more important one is Artemis, the Greek goddess of nature. And she was known as the Queen of Beasts. This is a particularly good recollection considering that Ransom has just been shepherded to her by a dragon and a yellow wallaby.
Yes. And while absolutely the connection to Artemis is important, the Maenads are...
They were connected with the festivities of Bacchus.
Yes. So there's a whole mythological sense. There's a whole tapestry that Lewis is really weaving here. Venus, Madonna, Artemis, Maenads, all of this richness embodied in her face.
Did you guys notice the echo? We saw this in Mere Christianity, and it's been in a couple of other of his works, The Four Loves as well, where he's talking about creatures. With the lady, it describes in her caresses of the animals, there was a condescension. which, by taking them seriously, the inferiority of her adorers, made them somehow less inferior, raised them from the status of pets to that of slaves. Lewis talks about this in quite a few places, that the new heaven and the new earth, and particularly with regards to animal life, will sort of come through human life, which itself has been raised into the divine.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I don't know if I would go all the way down the theological rabbit hole, but in some ways, we are inferior to God, but he raises us by his love for us. And so in a similar way, I think Lewis suggests that the animals are raised by our love for them. And here's the queen of all of these animals. And of course, it's going to remind us of Sarah Smith in The Great Divorce, and her being surrounded by all of her attendants.
And in this case, she speaks to the dragon and the yellow wallaby, seemingly in their own language, and they head back into the woods. And then we come to the section which I've entitled, It's All Relative, because this is where we find out about the rest of the life on Perelandra. Ransom begins by telling the lady that he's been sent by Maleldil, and he asks her if she knows why, and she doesn't. Then we get to the part where Ransom asks her about others on this planet. What does he discover?
Well, so they figure out, first of all, and he's kind of surprised by this, because remember, similar to Out of Silent Planet, he's coming in a disposition of not knowing and trying to figure it out. Now, obviously, a big difference here is he's open. There's even more openness and a trust and a surrender, but he finds out that she's only one of two people on Perelandra, and the other is this king, this future father of her children, and the two of them were separated by a large wave.
Another piece of this, too, is you get the benefits when you reread Perelandra. I've been having some nice text back and forth with Matt Wheeler, who just finished up the book and just loved it. Rereading it makes me so frustrated at Ransom because he doesn't understand what's going on. Ransom clung to her use of the word we, and who is we? What people? What do you mean? What's kindred? What do you mean? Do you mean the king? Yes, if you have a king. And we'll get the same confusion about the relationship to the king and the relationship to the lady when Merlin wakes up in that hideous strength. And she doesn't know what home means. She doesn't know what alone means. And so even though they're speaking the same language, they don't have this kind of vocabulary. And we soon find out why.
Do you guys notice that there was an echo of the Magnificat in this conversation?
How so?
Ransom says, I do not understand. Nor I, answered the lady. Only my spirit praises Maleldil, who comes down from deep heaven into this loneliness and will make me to be blessed by all the times that are rolling towards us. It is he who is strong and makes me strong and fills empty worlds with good creatures.
Whoa.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the Magnificat. For people that don't know the term, this is Mary's canticle, her song, her response to Elizabeth's praise as, who am I that the mother of my Lord should come visit me?
Yes, from Luke chapter 2, which also echoes Hannah's song about the coming kingdom. Yeah, it just echoes everywhere. It's just a rich, rich tapestry.
The Green Lady, once she realizes that our planet is no longer just a couple, but the children of children of children, she gives Ransom a message. She says, greet your lady and mother well from me when you return to your own world. Just to clarify, who's she talking about?
I think you can go in a couple of different ways. I think that she's talking about the original lady of our world, which was Eve. But I think that she also could be talking about the lady through whom Maleldil was born. She may not know it in those terms, but the fact that there is a lady in the world, I think, is reminiscent of both of them.
Well, there's actually also some very interesting biblical consequences of those terms, lady and mother, in the Genesis account of when Eve's name changes from woman to Eve. But we overran the last episode, so let's not do that again. But there is this very, very interesting consequence to her discovering that Ransom is a subject of that world and not its king, as she had first guessed. The text says, she was a queen sending a message to a queen through a commoner. And you might think that she therefore treats him more roughly, but it says no. Her manner to him was henceforth more gracious. In the last episode, we spoke about the romance, the adventure, the knights on horseback, courtly love, all this kind of stuff. And you see here that in this unfallen world, you see royalty, kingship, queenship as it is meant to be. That it's not oppression, but exaltation. In response to the Green Lady's request to send greetings to the lady and the mother of Earth. Ransom explains that she's dead, and the Green Lady asks what that is. All of the questions when you say, what is this? It's very clear that there's a lot of things that she hasn't experienced, and in this case, she hasn't experienced death of anybody. How does Ransom try to explain death to her? And how does she sort of react to his explanation? Because this bit is kind of comic.
Yeah, but it's poignant too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's horrible. It has a foul smell. Maladil himself wept when he saw it.
But he only says that in response to her original response, because he begins by saying, with us, they go away after a time. Maladil takes the soul out of them and puts them somewhere else. In deep heaven, we hope.
Mm-hmm.
And the Green Lady tells him not to be surprised at the unique role of Earth. Not only do we look out onto the heavens, unlike her experience on Perelandra, but Maladil takes everyone there when they die. And she wonders whether Ransom was actually sent to Perelandra to teach them about death. She doesn't see it as this great negative thing. It's like, oh, you get to go to deep heaven. How wonderful. And that's when Ransom says what you just quoted. He responds badly to this. He wants to communicate to her the horror of death.
Yes. Well, and actually, forgive us, we didn't know when we sat down to record that we were going to split it into two. So our quote from last week actually appears here. And Maladil takes us all there in the end. We are favored beyond all worlds. And she just doesn't get it. And isn't it refreshing that she doesn't?
What's also interesting is how Ransom explains that Maladil himself wept when he saw death. Mm-hmm. And this appears to be an allusion to the death of Lazarus in John 11. When Jesus comes and sees his friend in the tomb, he weeps.
Yeah. And he starts to understand her innocence. And says, you could never understand. In our world, not all events are pleasing or welcome. There may be such a thing that you would cut off both your arms and legs to prevent it happening. Yet it happens with us. And she says, and this is such great spiritual wisdom and a goal to return to, but how can one wish any of those waves not to reach us, which Maladil is rolling towards us? And so I've thought about this passage again and again, especially when I come across an unpleasant circumstance. This is the thing that God has sent me. Why would I not willingly accept and say, okay, even if I wouldn't have chosen this, this is what God has chosen for me. And Maladil, blessed be he, knows what's best for me. And so in her response, even though it's innocent, and in that way I can't relate to it, her faith that Maladil will send what he will send, and that it's our job to say yes to it, is, boy, I mean, that affects my everyday.
The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Blessed be the name of the Lord, yes.
Death played a big role in the last episode, or the last book, sorry. Mm-hmm. And a huge theme that really just stuck out to me was the wisdom of death. And so to what degree do you think Lewis is communicating that here? Do you think he is trying to communicate anything here from that perspective, or this is just meant to more communicate her lack of understanding and being educated and growing? I don't want to overread into it, but just because death was so big there and now it's being brought up here, do you think there's some intentionality in this?
Let me go a third way, and I hadn't thought about that until your excellent question. In Malacandra, we see a dying world, an innocent world, an unfallen world, but a world dying. In Perelandra, we see the beginning of a world. And then we learned in this chapter, that the other worlds wouldn't be able to be understood. And so part of what's difficult about the Ransom trilogy is when you get done with the first two books, people usually turn to That Hideous Strength, and it's a very different sort of novel. And, we don't get extraterrestrial travel, not to give away too much. And I was disappointed. I wanted more adventures like Ransom had, but that's because I wasn't a careful enough reader. We're learning about the end of the worlds. We're learning about the beginning of the worlds. What else would we want to necessarily see? And so that's part of what's happening here. She's the beginning of all things.
What about you, David?
I would say it is retreading some of the material from Out of the Silent Planet, but I think while Ransom has some of the wisdom of death from his experience on Malacandra, he still has a visceral reaction to it. He still doesn't see it as this blessed thing, which is how the lady is viewing it. Mm-hmm. He wants to communicate that, no, this is something horrible. We don't like this. We would get out of it if we could. She's teaching that not only is there something good in death, that this comes from the hand of Maleldil. And so why would we choose to resist anything that he wants to give us?
And her poignant response, "You make me grow older more quickly than I can bear."
I said that to Alexander just the other day.
Oh, really? Was he growing older more quickly than you can bear?
No, he was making me grow older more quickly than I can bear.
Oh, my goodness.
So, in response to the Green Lady's very admirable acceptance of the will of Maleldil, Ransom reminds her of when she first saw him, about how her face changed when she realized that he was not who she had hoped him to be, namely the king, her husband. And so he asks her, was that event not unwelcome? Did you not wish it to be otherwise? Because he's trying to get her to understand what it feels like to have your will thwarted, because he sees death as the ultimate thwarting of his will. He doesn't want to die, but it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. And this is where she can't handle what's going on. But isn't it like that with us as well? I mean, we want things to go our way and we're surprised when they're not. And I think some of the real work, it's certainly the work that I see come into, the people I see come into my office, week after week, is struggling with what God gives when it's not like what we would really like it to be. And for me, some of the, even the personal struggle is, boy, my job situation isn't worked out as it will be in a year. And rather than wishing I were somewhere else, receiving with grace and dignity where I am that very day. And part of, if I ever have any success in saying, okay, whatever Maleldil sends to me today will be okay, comes from the way that the lady responds as well. And so I get great hope and practical help, from this chapter. I hadn't realized how much in a while.
Well, there's, and I'll be curious, David, what kind of stuff you want to touch on in this section, but there is so much here. I think this is a part that I remember from reading this 15 years ago in college. And so I think there's just so much wisdom here on expectations, different goods brought our way, surrendering to that. I also think it's really interesting here that this is where, to take this back to the bigger progression of this, where Ransom starts to realize another piece to the puzzle of what his role is here. He still doesn't realize where this is fully going in his role here, but he says, it was suddenly borne in upon him that her purity and peace were not as they had seemed, things settled and inevitable, like the purity and peace of an animal, that they were alive and therefore breakable, a balance maintained by a mind and therefore, at least in theory, able to be lost. So that's telling of what this, if for those who have not read, I won't say anything, but where this could be going as the story unfolds.
And he's kind of terrified at the precarious nature of all of this.
Yes.
But it says that when she looked at him again, he changed the word to adventure. Interesting connection to romanticism and romantic literature. And then all words died out of his mind.
Once more, he could not steadily look at her. I love this. He knew now what the old painters were trying to represent when they invented the halo. Gaiety and gravity together, a splendor as of martyrdom, yet with no pain in it at all. It seemed to pour from her countenance. Yeah, love that.
She also has this rather enigmatic response saying, I have been so young till this moment that all my life now seem to have a kind of sleep. Once again, we're coming to conversion and change as being awoken or slowly waking up. I have thought that I was being carried, and behold, I was walking. And she goes on to talk about realizing something that's obvious to her that never occurred to her before. She describes the idea of going into the forest to pick a food with a particular fruit in mind, but finding another. What's she understanding in all of this? What's she starting to wrestle with?
She's starting to wrestle with the fact that there are choices, that it isn't all just a given, that she has some agency, that there's more to it than she had realized. Ransom is absolutely making her older. He's helping her step out of the along and look at the experience in order to understand it better. It does make her older. It makes her older well. It doesn't do her any harm, but it's a new experience, and she's not altogether, I think, comfortable with it. She's growing in her understanding.
Piggybacking off of your, she's not all too comfortable with it. The very ending is revealing of what she realizes. Like, she's truly understanding this. She says, you could refuse the real good. I also think it's interesting to use the word real good. You could make the real fruit taste insipid by thinking of the other.
Mhm.
Like that's a stark realization there of insipid. I mean, I think that was a very intentional word.
And it shows how we can kill our own joys by comparison
Yes.
and wanting something other than what we have. That we can actually turn what is a good, it can taste bitter to us because our will is not being done.
100%. I mean, how often do you think about that in life? Like, I'll just say this now, all of us honestly got married later in life, maybe than the average individual. And think of like that season when you were single, longing for something that you felt called to, but it wasn't coming. And that season itself, because God's like looking down, knows that season was a real good. But because we were holding on to a different good, at least in that moment, and desiring and wishing we would have had it sooner, could have maybe tainted what could have been a thriving period. And then all of a sudden the real good comes and you're like, oh, thank goodness. Like he had a plan. He had someone incredible. He had someone that they were waiting for. And you could have just really surrendered to that if you had that saint-like surrender. I know we're all human, but and how beautiful that could have been.
I had a buddy in the 90s who was married, like I am, to a redhead. He said to me once in the car, because I hadn't been married and I was, asking him what it was like and whatever. And he said, here's the thing. When you marry a redhead, it means that you will never be married to a brunette or a blonde. And yeah, there's a funny piece of it, but also this sense that making this one choice refuses all other choices. And that's part of why, divorce is such a problem in our society and all this, all this dissatisfaction. People can be so self-centered as to say, okay, here's the good that I wanted. Here's the good that I hoped for. And now I've gotten married and I've got it. But I have to continually turn my heart to the one that I have, not the millions that I won't have. And as people change, and now that you're all married men, you've experienced this as well. Although all three of us, we probably have about 10 or 15 years of marriage total between us. But to turn my heart not only away from everybody else, but turn to the person who is there today, not the one from yesterday, not the one that I wish, may wish that she might be, but just to say yes to this thing that God has given me. That takes, I think, faith and very deliberate, a very deliberate act of love. And she's learned this already. She knows this, to say yes to whatever Malodil sends, but it requires saying no to every other possibility.
Honestly, I want to pause there. I've never really thought about that. You think about the other woman in the sense of like, I don't mean you think about it. I mean, you realize you have the one in front of you and she's the one you love and you close yourself off. You understand this good and you don't think about the other good. I've never really thought about it within the same person, but as they change, that's interesting. That's a good thought, Andrew.
Fortunately, this is something I haven't had to deal with because my wife only gets better with time, like a fine wine.
I would agree. I expect this to completely as well, since I know she listens to every single episode.
Yes. But it's also, people are always changing, right? And if my wife, always were digging me about, hey, this is how you used to be. Why aren't you like that anymore? I'd be like, well, and Lewis says it about joy. I want her, not my image of her, right? I want the real joy, not the joy, and this, he says this after she dies, and who we are as people continually change. And so do I make space for my wife to become who she's becoming? And does she make space? Do I demand space for her to accept, well, that's how I used to be, but here's how I am now. And that's where I think that sometimes good friendships and even good family relationships can carry us to marriage because we're used to people changing, right? It's always a moving target. And so if I will say yes to the person that Malodil has given me to be married to today, that's probably a safer and a healthier path than, always throwing in her face or anyone's face what I wanted them to be. It's selfless. It's love. It's turning to them and turning away from who I wanted them to be.
And this is a real revelation to the Green Lady. In another passage full of I sees, She said, I thought that I was carried in the will of him I love, but now I see that I walk with it. I thought that the good things he sent me drew me into them as the waves lift the islands, but now I see that it is I who plunge into them with my own legs and arms as when we go swimming. Ransom asks her whether she's afraid that it'll be hard to turn her heart from the thing that she wanted to the thing given by Moleldil. And he focuses on the mistake that she made earlier. She saw Ransom, she thought it was the king. I mean, doesn't she want the king? And she says, how could there be anything I did not want? It seems that I see something good. Naturally, I want good things. How could I not want them? But Ransom's response is really telling, and I'm waiting for Andrew to bounce off this one quite considerably given his proclivities. Ransom responds, you can't want him very much if you are happy without him, he said, and was immediately surprised at the sulkiness of his own voice. Yes. Andrew, does that remind you of any other character in any other Lewis book?
Well, only the Lewis's Best book. It reminds me particularly of begging Bardia for the last moment with Psyche before she dies. And then when she gets into the room, Psyche's talking about her husband, right? And her lover. And Orwell's sulky because Psyche isn't talking about her. And in some ways, I think that Ransom is feeling very much that he is not the person that she wanted. But part of it too, and I'm not exactly sure entirely what to think about this. Want him, how could there be anything that I did not want? The word want is an interesting word. It means desire, but it also means lack. I think here it just means, how could I not desire what God has put in my life? But yeah, Orwell gets really upset when there's happiness that doesn't necessarily focus on her. So I think we see that triangle right there. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's exactly what I was thinking of. And actually, particularly once Psyche is married, Orwell is horrified that Psyche has happiness just with her husband.
Oh, you actually enjoy it, right?
Exactly. Wait, I'm not involved in this. How can you be happy? How can you be happy without me?
Right. And how can you be happy with a happiness that I don't or can't share?
Marie and I have actually spoken about this quite a lot recently, about the idea that while we love each other, we still find happiness and joy in other places. It's not like she is the focal point of my happiness. If that is what happens, then it's going to be very dangerous because it means that she is now the pinnacle of my loves, whereas she should at least be a couple of positions down, principally to the Trinity.
Right. But then the natural loves can be echoes of the divine love. And of course, the divine love has to stoop in order to help us to have our natural loves and to love them well.
But also, we don't have to throw out our silver to make room for gold.
Right.
You know, there are also other things in my life which bring me joy and happiness that are less than Marie, but they still bring me joy and happiness.
You know, I love smoking pipes with my friends. Kristen does not smoke a pipe. She would not be blessed by that. But she loves the fact that I get to have that time with my friends. I think a healthy relationship is one that allows the other person to continue to grow and to be who they are. Of course, you don't want to grow apart, but part of that takes very deliberate cultivation, especially of not only the loves that we share, keep romance alive, keep the spark alive, or adopt friendships with each other, but also continually praying, continually asking God to strengthen that relationship, and continually relying on the fact that it's only love himself that can make our loves valid, strong, helpful, beautiful, blessed, sustainable anyway.
So Ransom has just told her he doesn't know how she can be happy without the king. She asks why.
And before we get there, you can't want him very much if you were happy without him. I think he's projecting. And I think that maybe he's feeling lonely. He may feel rejected by her. And we don't know that I don't think Ransom has a wife. And so what is he expecting? All women to slavishly wait around to have their husbands to make them happy? And so he gets in a bit of a funk, which is completely illogical. You're on freaking Venus, dude. Why are you being such a pill about somebody not wanting you?
But I would also say this is not an uncommon reaction of someone who is single talking to someone who is married, who, because they haven't experienced it, they don't understand that there are other kinds of loves as well, particularly if you're focusing on one particular kind of love that you don't actually have. We're back to the four loves again. We're back to Orwell again.
Yes.
But in response to his sulky comment, she asks him, well, why couldn't I be happy without him? And she notices the face he's pulling. He's frowning, that he's shrugging his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, basically, what's the deal? Why are you doing this? And Ransom lies. He says they mean nothing. His visceral bodily reaction to his lie is really telling. I think I've used this example before, but it kind of reminds me of when you walk out of confession after you have laid down your burdens and then you get to your first major opportunity to do something dishonest or to tell a lie, to say something that isn't actually true. There is something in you that recognizes that this is not good. And it seems that Perelandra has had an effect on him in that kind of sense, forcing him to adjust what he's saying and say, oh, it means nothing to you.
If you're not familiar with the sacrament of reconciliation, going to confession, it's like having a quiet time and having a wonderful prayer time with the Lord in the morning and doing your devotions and everything is good and clean. And then you get in the car and somebody cuts you off and all of a sudden you're showing them the one-way finger, but you're using the wrong one, or whatever it is. You fall into an act of anger or lust or covetousness. And it almost feels as if you've spoiled the whole world, spoiled the whole day. Fortunately, mercies are new every morning. And it's always morning somewhere. But here, Ransom has really done something terrible. And I was very much struck by this. He has committed perhaps the first sin ever in this world. And I'm glad that it doesn't stain more than it does. But I love the description. It tore him as he uttered it like a vomit. What did you make of this description of his response to his lie, Matt?
Honestly, I wouldn't add anything. I thought I was thinking exactly what David said of when I come out of the confessional and like coming out of the car wash, you just feel this grace and this peace, and then you sin in some way, shape, or form, and you do actually have a visceral kind of response. It's just like so devastating.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that visceral response gets deadened the more you do it.
Yes. As if stunned by some measureless anger in the very air. So he can feel the displeasure of Maladil for him having lied and committed a sin. It's like, how dare you besmirch this unfallen world? And he stammers out, well, they mean nothing that I could explain to you, which is better. It's true, perhaps. It's at least coming back some direction from an outright falsehood. But, this made me shudder here.
And there are echoes of The Magician's Nephew, which is unsurprising, given it's the other Venusian book.
Yes.
About when Aslan speaks about this world not being very old, but still evil has been brought to it.
Oh, and then the response, what is a Nevil? They don't even know what the word evil is because it was an unspoiled world. And so they share the Green Lady's kind of ignorance of those things beyond their ken.
Well, it's now the lady's turn to say that they've spoken enough for now. But again, this is kind of funny. She says, okay, I think we're done here. And then she stays standing. She stays exactly where she is. And so Ransom, when he realizes what's happening, like a courtier before a queen, he backs off, he steps back a pace or two, and then makes his departure. It's like, oh, I'm leaving.
You may leave now. I did like this. Perhaps in the presence of the first mother's son she had ever seen. She was already dimly forecasting the problems that might arise when she had children of her own. Because Ransom was the first mother's son. She had seen the king, but he wasn't a mother's son. And so she's like, oh boy, this isn't going to be the last time that this happens, perhaps. So,
yes. Another son of Adam is going to bring something bad, but that would be getting ahead of ourselves.
Oh, I was just talking about her own children.
Oh, yes. That was how I read it initially, but the way that you described it there, I actually thought of another son of the mother of Thalcandra, who is going to be a bit of a handful.
Yes.
But as we wrap up, is there anything else that either of you would like to share before we close?
I enjoyed Matt Wheeler's reaction to me on text and how magnificent he found this book and was reminded of the richness of insight and wealth, the wealth of wisdom that's in here. I said to my wife before I came upstairs to record, I just had forgotten how so very good this book is. So I was glad to rehearse that with you two.
I'm in the same camp. I thought Out of the Silent Planet was very good. Surprised to the upside. Because I feel like the Ransom trilogy just has this reputation of just, at least to non-Lewis scholars, it's just not quite like some of his other stuff. It's decent. And I was like, Out of Silent Planet was better than Descent. It was really good. And this is just turning out to be fantastic. Really high quality.
The thing that has struck me as we've been going through it thus far is, once again, the use of language. And in the same way that in Out of the Silent Planet, Weston's philosophy of life was unveiled when it was put in clear terms, here we see even Ransom's fallen, confused ideas be exposed as he's trying to communicate them to the lady. It causes you to really slow down, if you give it the opportunity, to really slow down and think about what it is that they're saying and look at those ideas with fresh eyes because it's being expressed in fresh language, which I consistently argue is Lewis's real gift. He gives you timeless truths, but in a new way. And very often it's more accessible to help you grasp them more easily. But in this case, I would say they're a little bit more inaccessible to force you to think.
Yes. Well, and part of that is because Lewis has stepped out of his own experience and looked at it so that he can help us to look along our own experience better. And for that, I owe him a great debt.
Well, I hear the call for final drinks. So thank you to our intern, Julia, and our sound engineers, Taylor and Sarah. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, particularly our top tier ones, Joanna, Brian, and Meg, Rebecca, Sarah, Mark, Kevin, Aldo, Bud1, Bud2. I was just going to say Bud squared. Edgar, James, Matt, Erica, Joelle, Amanda Thomas, Shane, Becca K, Paul, Gary, Stephen, Kelly, John, James, Kate, Peter, David, Angela, Rowdy, and my wife, Mary Margaret. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening.
We're so grateful for you.
So please join us again next time,
when we'll continue going further up
and further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.